Welcome back to the program. Let's go to the top of the board. Line number 1. Good morning, Chris. You're on the air.
Hey, good morning, Patty. How are you today?
Doing okay, thanks. How about you?
Oh, doing good, thanks. I got a bunch of boring stuff about Seamus's call, so I'm just going to start kind of clicking through it, and we'll see what comes up, eh?
Okay.
The top of it, he said that this is a private money investment, and you raised a lot of really good questions, Patty, and I really appreciate it because these things do deserve extra attention. And so we don't actually know how much, say, World Energy GH2 has spent. And Seamus kind of says, well, we need to follow the money, and that's how you'll find out where the good investments are. And so far, even without final investment decision, they say they've spent that $120 million or so, whatever. But how much of that was on flights? How much of that was on advertising? How much of that was on lobbying? How much of that was on taking our residents to court, which is still ongoing now? How much of that was deploying tactical synergy? I wouldn't describe any of those things as investing in Newfoundland. And we have definitely subsidized it. And so there's this strange narrative that, well, we're not going to repeat Muskrat Falls, because this is private money, and we should be proud and excited about that.
Well, I just think the mention of Muskrat in the same sentence is just purposefully misleading anyway. And people use it from both sides, right? They're going to say that, well, this is just like Muskrat, or the minister said we're going to avoid trying to replicate Muskrat. It's an entirely different kettle of fish. I'm the customer for Muskrat Falls. It was built and managed by the Crown Corporation. This is not. And, the funding at this moment in time, I think there's a fair debate to be had about, points taken that you say, investing in the province does not include marketing and taking people on and all that kind of the specifics that you mentioned. The only support we've seen so far regarding tax dollars out the door, and we're not even sure how much of this has been accessed at this moment in time, is the federal government granted them a $128 million loan in the form of a line of credit, so they can withdraw as they see fit. No other public monies have flowed at this moment, but at some point, if this project gets built, there will be copious amounts of money, hundreds of millions of dollars available in the form of tax subsidies. So it's a public project, so to speak.
And I would actually suggest we have spent a bunch of money, in particular on one of a newly popular topic now, which is Crown lands. It's not that our government hasn't invested in modernizing Crown lands in the last few years. They did. They did a total overhaul on the site and the publications, but they did it to further the wind project, not to resolve the ongoing conflicts they have with their citizens. And we don't know how much of these kind of in-kind donations the province has made to clear the path for these guys. We don't really know how much they've spent also flying around and advertising on their behalf. Our hydrogen strategy, there are indignant air quotes that I'm making there, Patty, is really just an advertising piece for these companies. It's not a good technical document. And these are all very technical things. And so, like on Muskrat Falls, there's lots of reasons to be angry about that. But the core of the cost overruns came from trying to build a dome over the construction site and setting their timelines around that. And then they tried to do it twice. And this is not random people. These are the captains of industry of our province. This is Danny Williams. This is Kathy Bennett and Siobhan Cody on the board of Nalcor. These were the titans of industry who were supposed to be trusting, that aren't the nonsense bureaucrats or whatever. It's so bizarre. And so within those lack of technical details and technical expertise, Seamus he did a speed run of wrong statements. So he said we're going to have a 99% clean grid. That is a very unrealistic thing within at least a decade. So Hydro occasionally does reach out to me, which is nice, and I appreciate that. Thanks, guys. And one of my tweets said there are people saying we have a 99% clean grid. And they were like, oh, no, we want to make sure that's not out there and that none of our people are saying that, because not only do we not have that, we won't be able to achieve that anytime soon. And that's our utility. That's the people who actually make the power. and so, we don't actually have our April monthly supply report, but March was about 13% of our power delivered came from hydrocarbons. Friday, the last bit of data we have was 11.29%. And we're supposed to be hitting 90, 92, 93, 95%, depending on the demand of the day. And so because the Labrador Island Link hasn't been working very well, we have not been hitting those numbers. And we won't. We need Holyrood if we want to have lights. It is not a problem run roughshod. It is an example of the province not investing in on-island generation. And you can go back through Hydro's reports for a few years where they're essentially begging, saying we need more on-island generation. It will take 10 years to build anything. We need this, we need this, we need this. And so, I'm a high-level hippie. I don't like the idea of using chemicals on my farm or my garden, and but I also really like having lights. So this mystique around the 99% clean grid is one, not accurate, and two, not helpful or reasonable.
And even just the cost, the newly updated price tag for the road to net zero by 50/50, and net zero doesn't mean zero, it means net zero. That price tag has become astronomical and maybe even impossible. Add to it the amount of work that has to be done on the grid, and that would include all the new electrical engineers we're going to need, all the work we're going to need by linemen and the others, and to build and maintain the grid. We are talking about a position that the country is nowhere near achieving, not even close. Final thoughts to you before I take another call, Chris?
Well, so different places are actually pretty close to achieving it. The minister did take some time to point out Alberta, which is a really terrible example. They do have a bunch of new money going into wind and solar, but currently 23.9% of their grid is renewable. And that, will probably hang around there for the day. It gets less windy the sunnier it gets, but demand goes up. Alberta is certainly not the grid to look at if you want to have clean technology. And I do want to point out that there was an email between Seamus and Andrew Parsons from 2021 where they did actually both discuss the solutions that the province needs. Seamus asked Andrew to consider building an SMR, which is a small modular nuclear reactor, which would fill our gap for Holyrood quite nicely. And Andrew responds in the letter saying, we're actually kind of considering that, but it's illegal right now, so we can't consider it too much. But we would like for you to help pay for a line to Nova Scotia. And the federal government has not done that. And that line would improve Muskrat Falls, which was, needs still more investment, and would also knock a bunch of coal off of Nova Scotia's grid. But neither of those good things have happened, and instead both parties have spent their time and energy over these last 3 years on a wind project, begging private investors to spend probably less than 50% of the ticket price, and for the public to own none of it. It is I just can't help but feel that people would come away less informed if they were to believe the things that Mr. O'Regan said.
Well, ownership can max out at 60 because there's up to 40% and that's only capital cost recovery from the federal government. Is the variance between 15% and 40% is currently what's on the table. Does anybody know how that's going to be applied? No. Why? Because they haven't defined green, which, I know that's not as fundamental as saying X, but you would think when these types of big numbers are floated, they'd be already well down the road for applying this definition, because it'll feel different in Nova Scotia for Everwind than it will for Everwind here, if either even happen. And of course,
we also have the 200 million double-sided auction, and that's 200 million euros that we have decided to apply to the production side. And meanwhile, Germany has announced today they are not going to hit their 2030 hydrogen goals because of a lack of demand side, which we are not developing. And last week, they closed down the hydrogen department in their transport department because it was so addled with fraud. So I certainly hope we stop doing all of these very silly energy investments, because it has been a waste of many years and many, many millions of dollars, and we will not be well served if any of these investments come to pass.
Appreciate the time, Chris. Thank you.
You too, Patty. Thank you.
Bye-bye. And the minister also did mention, upon being asked about it, is that apparently the amendments to the Atlantic Accord to allow for the potential for offshore wind has passed third reading, so that's coming very, very quickly. Can that play a role in the hopeful sometime into the future decommissioning of Holyrood? I don't know. And we also know that they're looking around at a variety of options. And the forecasted demand side, Jennifer Williams said on this show that it's going to increase by 13% by 2030. So they're talking about a 150 megawatt generator at Holyrood, possibly, and other opportunities. That SMR conversation never really went that far. Remember when it was floated about having a nuclear waste dump site in Labrador? And I think that was floated by Jean Chrétien, as a matter of fact. Anyway, let's take a break.